Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on miamighostchronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind the scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing today? I'm doing fantastic. As I said before, we just came into May, and here in South Florida, as you know, the weather here is either hot or hotter, and we're starting to get the even though surprisingly, it's been kind of weird though because we've been usually by now we're into kind of the rainy season. We haven't gotten the rainy season, and it's really funny. It's like in the 80s, but then it goes down to the 60s at night. It's the weird. The weather's kind of a little bit weird, but anyway, I'm excited because of course, what makes Marlene happy is the guests I have, and today I have two, not one, but two. Uh, you want to call them paranormal investigators slash psychics. Uh, their name is Dwight and Rhonda Hull. And let me give you a little bit of information about them. Now, they specialize in communicating with the dead through the use of intuition, dowsing, and EVPs. They also do research into history as far as unresolved deaths, etc., to find the truth. And you know, I've spoken about it a million times in my other shows that sometimes when you do the research, which sometimes can be time consuming depending on how far back, you discover a wealth of information that sometimes substantiates maybe the identity of a haunting, and sometimes it cancels it out. But what you find in its place is even more disturbing. And they've appeared on numerous radio shows, and Dwight appeared on the Tombstone episode of Ghost Adventures. And they have published several news articles, they lecture at events. They also do historical tours, and their first book is coming out in about a week or so, which is titled Speaking with the Spirits of the Old Southwest, which I was telling them I'm so happy that I'm being able to interview them now as their book is about to hit the shelves. So how are you guys doing today?
We are well.
We're
We are
doing
doing
good.
very well.
Fantastic. Well, anyway, guys, and you please chime in at whatever order you guys want to. I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests. How did you become involved in the paranormal? Was it something that happened to you as children and then you just went into that field, or was it something afterwards as adults?
Well, for me, I saw my first ghost when I was like 6. Um, excuse me. And he was just one of the many that appeared to me throughout my life. That's kind of when I knew that I could see and speak to spirits. And it just kept occurring, over and over. So all my
Okay.
life.
And I'm gonna this was, you said the first, this is like in other words, I take it you kept on seeing, was it the same ghost, or did you all of a
I
sudden
kept,
after that you started
no,
seeing them at different places?
different ghosts. Yeah.
Different ghosts. Okay.
Different ghosts, all different places, at my house, at family's house, at my schools, anywhere death happened, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much I was seeing spirits and receiving information psychically as well.
Okay. And let me ask, because a 6-year-old, and you know, that's the good thing about children, is their innocence as far as not questioning, like, why am I seeing something that I know I shouldn't be seeing? At what point did you realize, Rhonda, or was it right away that not everybody was able to see what you were seeing?
It was right away.
Okay.
I could see this man I was at my cousin's house, and my cousin and I were in my uncle's barn,
Okay.
and I could see this man. I had a full-on conversation with him, but my cousin did not know who I was talking to.
Okay.
So it just progressed from
So in other words, yeah, that's really interesting because you actually had a conversation because sometimes even children they'll see an apparition or something, but all they do is just see something or somebody. But you actually were able to communicate, which is
right.
wow. Yeah.
A full
You see dead
conversation,
people.
and he was very grandfather. Yeah, I see dead people. Exactly.
And how about you, Dwight?
Well, psychically, since I was a very small child,
Okay.
I kind of honed in on animals more than I did human.
Oh, really?
I was able to communicate with my living cats when I was very, very small. I used to lay on the floor and talk to my cat, and he would talk back to me, and I would be able to tell my parents, who, by the way, never believed me, but uh, they kind of thought I was a little out there, but I was telling them the truth. Even when I
Right.
wasn't home, I was able to say, what was going on. As and as far as ghosts and such like that, and investigating, I guess I was interested in it probably since about 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
Reading all the books and all that,
Right.
and after I graduated high school, I finally had the opportunity, to do an investigation, and after that, I got my first EVP, and I
Okay.
was hooked. I was hooked for life. So I'm able to, both do it psychically and, standard, I guess you'd say, with just some
Right.
equipment.
Right. And yeah. Your parents must have thought, "Oh, our little boy, he has such a great imagination. He talks to the cats." But
Yeah.
that again, that's what I'm saying. A lot of adults, that's kind of normal. Where it's like his imagination is just running away with him. He's an animal lover. But let me, and this is, and do you still have that ability as far as psychic communications with animals into adulthood?
Oh, absolutely. Readings for people all the time.
Okay.
I, if I contact, pets that have crossed over, pets that were, missing and crossed over, I was able to tell people, how their pet may have passed away. Yeah, so I'm still, really active in that. I let Rhonda handle the people, and I handle the animals. It's a lot easier.
I know what you mean. It's like I do better with the people than the animal. I mean, I do better with animals than with people. Yeah, and the reason why I asked you is that I hate to say it, but sometimes I think children, not all children, obviously, but children, they kind of lose that ability because they're told, like all of a sudden they're told, you're imagining it. You can't do, yeah,
They don't exist.
right. What are you doing? So they kind of like get told so many times that they lose that ability, that open-minded thing, and then before you know it, they just don't do it anymore. So that's why I asked you that, that even as an adult, you've been able to retain that ability to communicate with animals. Um, so
And it actually comes in really handy when we're on an investigation at like a client's house,
really,
because if they have an animal, he can actually talk to the animal and get the animal's take on what's happening in the house, because sometimes people are not always forthcoming, or it's their perception, so he can get the animal's version of what's going on.
that is fascinating. That is something else because of course everybody's always hears about animals being a lot more sensitive and that's one of the first indicators that sometimes people have that something's going on when their animal starts acting strangely. But the ability of being able to get, for lack of a better word, the animal's perspective on who or what is doing that, that's incredible. I would love to go on a paranormal investigation with you, because it's invaluable because I again, most people just limit it to the animal's reaction, but they don't go beyond
Yep.
that. Either the animal is scared or they're going after something. But the ability to kind of get that communication. What what have you ever had a really unusual case where you've had an animal tell you something as to what was at a location?
Yeah, it happens probably a little more often than you might think.
Okay.
We'll go in and the people will be kind of hesitant about telling us, or I guess they're trying to figure out if we'll figure it out. They don't have to tell us. So usually when I walk into a location, I can either sense or obviously see that they have an animal. And I'll
Okay.
just, without saying much, I'll just say, hey, you mind if I talk to your cat? And they, of course, kind of look at me a little bit weird. But
I love it. I love it.
when I start talking to them and getting information that I can only get from the animal, then they're kind of,
Then
you
they'll
know,
open up. Yeah.
spellbound, so to speak, and they want to know more. And it definitely does help. We
Right.
were able on a few times to see that, the spirit haunting the place was not, say, like a man; it was a woman.
Oh,
When the
really?
people thought it was a man, and vice versa.
Or
Okay.
that they thought it was, demonic and it's their mother.
Yeah,
I mean,
And you know what? I hate to say this, and I've spoken about it in other shows. I think the D word, the demon thing, is overused sometimes to
yeah.
explain
absolutely.
certain hauntings. And,
Oh,
sometimes, because I
absolutely.
understand people get scared, you get a creepy feeling, and right away everybody goes to the worse. That, and I say, you know what? There's human spirits out there that were nasty human beings when they were alive. And now, even when they're dead, they creep out the living really bad. And people automatically connect that feeling of malevolence to being demonic. When in truth, it's just that this was a real jerk, to put it nicely, when they were
Right.
alive. And they just gave off the same vibes. But it's still a human spirit. But yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
poor mom was being I wonder whose mother-in-law she was, as far as in the household. I'm sure there's people out there that are gonna be going, "Hey, yeah, I would probably think that my mother-in-law would." I think that was a demonic spirit, but that's yeah, and that's and I know in some cases you hear about some supernatural events where or haunted houses where the animals are targeted as well. That sometimes it's like when I hear some of these
Yeah.
stories, initially I'm thinking, okay, you know what? I know sometimes animals can die unexpectedly, and you know, so it makes me wonder: is it because they just died because animals die just the way humans die, not because of old age, and sometimes not even because of sickness? It's just something happens with them, or was there truly
Yeah.
something that was targeting the animals? Have you run across anything like that where the animals communicating and saying it's like I'm more scared than the humans are in animal talk, I
Well, I can
guess.
tell you firsthand. We moved into this house a little over a year ago. When we first moved in, we knew we had one spirit here, a former owner. We did not know we had multiple spirits right away.
Okay.
But in about a 2 week period, our I mean, shortly after we moved, our cat was already freaked out because of the whole trauma of moving.
Yes.
Um, and I had to tell the former owner to kind of back off his energy and not show himself to her because he
Okay.
was freaking her out. He was a cat lover. But then, two times within maybe a 3 day period, she likes to go in our master bath and sit up in the window.
Okay.
And the door opens, it's behind the door. So she's kind of hiding.
Okay.
Well, twice that door shut all the way and locked her in the bathroom. She
Oh,
couldn't get out, and there was no breeze. The windows weren't open. Even if they were, there couldn't have been a cross breeze that would shut that door. It really freaked her out so bad that she wouldn't even hardly go in our bedroom.
okay.
Come to find out, we had other experiences in our bedroom, not necessarily negative, but letting us know that they're here.
Right.
Um, Come to find out, long story short, this used to be Native American land
Okay.
and a site where they lived. We're talking at least pre-Apache, maybe even going back to prehistoric.
Wow.
But we found stuff in our backyard that gave us that conclusion.
Interesting. Because you know what? And I'm glad you brought
So
that
we
up because, a lot of people sometimes when they do, they start going back, especially if there's, like when you do the research, sometimes you find a history of hauntings at a location. And then when you go a little bit further, it's tied into the land. And then when you go a little bit further, it's Native American. And everybody always looks at, as a Native American, as the burial ground. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? That spot necessarily couldn't have didn't have to be a burial ground. It could have been a place where they had ceremonies, for example. And you could get a lot of unusual and weird
oh
things happening at that look. Everybody thinks it's just because it's where they bury people. Not, they might have even chosen the
no,
place because of
no.
something
I
going
mean,
on there.
yeah, I mean this. We think this was a settlement area for
Okay.
the local Native Americans. There's a couple of rivers that are not too far,
Okay.
but we found worked obsidian in our backyard, and obsidian is not native to this area.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, probably a Native American man not very happy with us being on half the bedroom. It was only half the bedroom,
Really?
so
Yeah, it almost makes you like
yeah,
he's
yeah,
living in the
only
structure, whatever it was that pertained to half of the room, I guess.
right. Yeah,
Interesting.
only on Dwight's side.
Lucky Dwight, huh? He must have been like, So, and one of the things, and it's sometimes one, and I don't know you guys if you've done research, because I know because you guys live out west, and I know that in a lot of these like Tombstone, all these frontier and mining towns, there was a lot of things that went on out there as far as what I call that generate a ghost, violent sudden death,
Oh yeah.
um, just a lot of stuff, human drama. Have you guys run across that? I mean, there's certain things that are very well publicized, but even in these little small towns, a lot of things were going on that were violent, for lack of a better word, out there. It was like, in other words, you didn't have sometimes a sheriff or the law was a long time coming, so people a lot of times took the law into their own hands.
Yeah, that's the way it was mostly around here. Before the ERPs came in and
Mm-hmm.
started taking the law more seriously. But we go to places, ghost towns that are just, I mean, little bitty ghost towns, and we run into people that were murdered. A lot of what we run into is also disease, because back then,
That's right.
there wasn't a lot of medicine. So a lot of the children, especially, would succumb to the diseases or, pneumonia or what have
Mm-hmm.
you. We've run into that a lot of times. But yeah, as far as violence, it was all over. Um,
Oh, and a lot of times, I mean, as long as there was a weapon in the victim's hands, hey, it was self-defense. So, I mean, that's
Right.
just
And I'm
how it
thinking
was
to
out here.
myself, and the reason why I say because I see that the title of your book that's coming out is speaking with the spirits of the old Southwest, and that's why I bought up because out there, and I'm thinking to myself, not even of the self-defense out there. I imagine you could get rid of somebody, and especially if you had people that were homesteads were like maybe miles from maybe the little town. Who's to say where the bodies were buried? That kind of thing. And back there was no forensics, no DNA, no circumstantial evidence. So I'm thinking to myself, how many people were done away with and they're just buried out there. And those are the people sometimes that maybe their
Hmm.
ghost is saying, hey, I want some justice. Uh, and I know
oh yeah,
sometimes because
yeah,
of those mines, some of those mining towns, there was what they call, what is it, that claim jumping and stuff like that.
oh
Oh yeah.
yeah, yep. Claim jumping, and there's a small building out here in the desert called Brunkow Cabin, which is for Arizona history, it's called the bloodiest patch of earth in Arizona because there's over
Wow.
26 people that were killed either because of attempted claim jumping or robbery or what have you. So yeah, even the small little one cabin places, you still had to deal with that. I mean, you had to take the law in your own hands, and whoever survived was right. I mean,
Right,
that's
yeah,
just the
and
way
it's
it
like,
was.
Yeah.
and you always think of that because I imagine back east it was like you had the more established cities and you had police departments and it was more law and order, I guess. But out further
Right.
west, and you had people out there sometimes that, and I imagine sometimes, when they had those gold strikes in some of these mines or whatever, even or gold or silver, whatever the whatever was found, people would go out there and, from what I understand, like sell everything they had just to get enough money to go out there and mine. And sometimes it could be kind of desperate. And sometimes some of the people that you had out there also were like, you had to deal with every type
Oh,
of person out there.
you had some bad characters.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had some bad characters, and not out here, you had the Indians, the Native Americans. So they were not only, they had to be careful of other shady people, but a lot of people got killed killed by Native Americans.
Well, yeah, right, because
So
you're out, what are they? The Apache, what do you have? Apache, Comanche, or who's
Apache,
Apache,
yeah,
right?
Apache, but they're fierce warriors.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
From what I understand, Apache could be like you didn't want to
They
get
were.
captured by Apache, something like that. They could
You
be,
did not. You did not. Thank
yeah,
God we're friends with them.
right. No, no. I and also I think that's, you see that in a lot of, well, some of the older westerns, whatever. That sometimes about the only kind of protection if you were out there settling was those forts that they would have out there. Um, but even then, that was no instant
Yeah.
security if you were living in, a few miles out. Which is, I imagine, also a lot of people also went out there not
Oh
only
yeah.
for mining and frontiers, but they could get a hold of land for ranching or just to have a homestead. I imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely. And like from Brunkow, you can see Fort Huachuca, which back then was Camp Huachuca, the military.
Mm-hmm.
But that was, a couple days ride on a horseback.
Right. Yes,
So,
and I know the terrain out there. I'm trying to think because I once drove through there going out. It's there's a lot of vast empty, kind of like desert, kind of like dry. That's what the feeling I got when I was out there. So I imagine that also presented some challenges. So let me ask you, when you went out there, did you go out to certain places, like when you were writing the book of, places that were already known to be haunted, or did you stumble across some that you didn't, or once you were there, or you started doing the research, it was like something else came out of it?
Um, well, most of the places we went to for the history at first,
Mm-hmm.
because they were, small little ghost towns and such.
Right.
And wherever you have towns, you have people, and wherever you have people, you have death. So, it turns
Yes.
out to be haunted, irregardless. So, um, every place that we've been to, we try to find a place that has a lot of history, and, make it an interesting story, but then
Sure.
try to add the human, component to the ghosts that come in and tell us, what it was like in that town, or, how they died, or, who died there. We try to tell history through the voices of those who lived it.
Okay.
So any place we go, you know, generally the farther out you go, the more willing they are to talk,
Okay.
because you don't get visitors very often.
Right, right. I
and
imagine,
we
and I
we
guess
kind of
that's
do
what I
it the
was
reverse.
getting to. Have you ever heard? Because I think sometimes some ghosts or spirits, exactly what you said, they want acknowledgement. Maybe they died with, like, either I want to know what happened, or this is what happened, or you know, then there's nobody
Yeah,
there. Like you said, it's a ghost town.
a lot of
Everybody's
times,
moved away. All the living are gone.
a lot.
Have you run
Sometimes
across
we'll go
any
out
of
and
them
we'll
that
have an
didn't
expect.
realize they were dead? I know this sounds like everybody thinks that ghosts, but did you run across any that really didn't understand that time had passed by and that they were ghosts?
Well, we've had some that, really don't have a strong grasp on, time.
Okay,
They're
right.
just there. Um, some of them that we've talked to are very happy where they're at. In fact,
Okay,
they decided to stay there.
okay.
Some were afraid of crossing over,
Mm-hmm.
judgment and all that.
Sure.
In fact, in the book, one of the last chapters of the book, we actually were able to help a murder victim who came back to help his murderer cross
Really?
over. He forgave him. Yeah,
Oh,
it's a dynamite chapter. It was just we were
That
doing an
is
event at the time in this small little theater, and when we crossed him over, the energy just snapped through that place so hard that everybody, and I mean everybody, almost 40 people started crying
wow.
immediately, including Brian Cano from Haunted Collector, who was there.
Okay.
And he's very scientifically, he's a great guy, but even he looked at me and said, "What the heck just happened?"
Okay.
Because it was just that powerful. So, yeah, we run into that quite often.
Right. And that talks a lot about human forgiveness and yeah. And I truly believe like what you described that sometimes some spirits they're not bound per se because of unfinished business but because of fear. They're afraid especially if
right.
they were brought up with that thing about you're going to burn in hell, that if maybe they did certain things, whether they were really, really bad or not as bad, but whatever, but they think that they're going to get judged, they're like, I'm not really happy where I'm at, but this is better than getting judged and going to the hot place. So they
Right.
just stick it out. And then,
Right.
Right.
well, and think about it, here you are, if you're a horrible person and you were a murderer and your victim comes back and tells you it's going to be okay. But I can see how you would think, well, maybe, if this person is willing to forgive me,
Trying to lead me into the.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
it's like it kind of like gives that. But yeah, I've heard of that because sometimes, you always hear about those stories about those spirits crossing over, and it's either a family member coming to get them. But what if this person really had a really bad relationship with their family members? It happens. You know,
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
they
Oh,
didn't have a good relationship with parents or with whoever was around them. It was really horrible. And they would be the last people that they would go off with into the afterlife. So along comes your victim. And that is such a great story, you guys. That is fantastic. And
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, considering that you've gone into all these ghost towns and all these places, have you ever had any of them try to come back with you guys?
Oh yeah.
oh, yeah. We've
Yeah.
actually invited some of them back if they wanted
Okay.
to. In fact, one that Rhonda invited back was Maddie Earp,
Wyatt Earp.
Oh,
Wyatt
your
Earp's wife when she was here.
Maddie was
Yeah,
the
we went and talked to her.
she was married to
The one
which one of the Earp
before
brothers?
Wyatt.
Wyatt. Wyatt Earp.
Okay, I'm sorry because I'm trying to get
Wyatt.
them straight. Was she number two? She was
Yes.
number two. She was the one that didn't she commit suicide out in the little town out there, and I think it was in Arizona, or New Mexico.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry because
Arizona.
sometimes
Yeah.
I get them all confused. You got oh, I want to hear about that. What happened with that?
Nice. Nice night. I mean, our first visit in book one, um, it was a very different story. She was in a very different place, but we
Okay,
went out there again to kind of revisit with her for
okay,
book two, which, is not out obviously yet, but just a whole different vibe, a whole different transition for Maddie, whose real
mm-hmm.
name is Celia. Um, and we really got to know her better this time around. It was a really good visit. She was what we think she had her own gifts when she was alive. I mean, we had a really in-depth conversation with her.
Okay,
Very gifted when she was living. Um, she now kind of goes back and forth, but protects the other spirits that are in that town. Sort of,
okay.
she's a kind of a guide. But just a neat gal. I wish I could have known her when she was living, but I invited her back to our house to have kind of a good visit down here because her life in Tombstone was not good.
No, I
She
kind of
was,
like. I think she got the short. No,
you know,
no, it wasn't good.
Yeah, she did.
yeah.
She did. Yeah.
So we invited her back to our house and knew that she would know how to get here. And I said, Maddie, if you come visit us, I want you to give me a sign. We're going to have a little signal. So you can do something with my electronics,
Okay.
but please do it twice so that I know that it's you. And that night when we got home, I was sitting out in our screen porch area, and my cell phone was, it was on, but the screen was black.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, my camera, my cell phone came on. And I looked
Wow.
at it, and I didn't even think about it. I just, turned it off, turned the screen black, black again. And it came on one more time. And then I'm like, twice. That was twice.
Yes.
And then
Wow.
I welcomed her to our house, and it never happened again. So she did it twice.
That is
So
incredible. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? And the reason why I was familiar with her was I wrote a book last year which was about the wicked ladies of the Old West. And, I ran across her
Wow.
story real quickly. That's why I was saying I know that, she kind of like, I felt very bad about what happened to her and how she ended up taking her life in this little town. And, um, he went on and had
now,
taken
yeah,
up with the wife that all the movies are made around, which is Josie, and
right.
nobody realizes that prior to that he had other relationships and other wives and everything. Everybody just thinks that's the jumping off point for his romantic life, even though I know they portray her in these movies kind of like, I don't know, like very unhappy, but still at the same time, what ended up happening to her was kind of sad. So I'm really glad to hear
Very sad.
that you were able
Very
to
sad.
communicate with her. And that's one of the things also that I wanted to mention that a lot of people don't realize is, because everybody thinks of, um, the Old West as far as the gunfighters and, all these things that were going on there, whether you were the lawman or the gunfighter or the cowboys, and but also women out there. It was a very difficult life sometimes, and a lot of women ended up going to become either dance hall girls or into prostitution. But because they had no choice, it was like either that or starve.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
you know, um, it was sometimes a very difficult life, and some of them made it out the other end. Some of them, like Maddie, kind of like, they just their life ended prematurely. There was one lady. She was known as her. You know how people they would get names, and they called her Square Tooth Alice. I don't know if you ever heard of her. And
No.
she was originally from Texas, and she ended up going through the Chisholm. Well, she was when she was about 11 years old. She was uh, kidnapped from a family farm by the Comanche, and this was because
I do remember. Yeah.
all the soldiers had gone off to the Civil War. So normally all these outposts and forts that were manned, and the men, everybody was gone.
Right.
She ended up getting kidnapped. 2 years later, she comes back, and of course, back then, uh, her family finally located who the ones that had taken her, and they negotiated her return. And that time she was like 13 years old. And back then it was a very difficult thing for a family because everybody was thinking, what happened to you while you were being held captive? Make a long story short, she's very young. She hooks up with a guy in his 20s. Her father doesn't like him, shoots him dead, and then she runs off and goes into all these cattle towns like Abilene and all of those you know rowdy places where all the cowboys would go,
Right.
and eventually she fell into that lifestyle. But I'm gonna go real. She ended up dying when she was like 90 something out in California because her kids
Wow.
eventually moved out there, and yeah, she had a very very interesting life. And everybody thinks, well, how can a 13 or a 14-year-old by the time? How did she end up? Because she lived down in southern Texas. How did she end up going by herself out to up to Chisholm Trail and going to Abilene and all these different towns that were set up? And I said, at that point, she had already been abducted for 2 years. Believe me, she had learned to survive. And I guess my point
Yeah.
is that back then, we think now of a 13-year-old and it'd be like, oh my God, no. And it's like back then you grew up quick.
Yes.
you had to grow up quick to
Yep.
survive, and she ended up, like I said, married, and she ended up marrying a guy that he was a little bit of a gunfighter, but they had several kids, but she ended up dying into her 90s, which, like I said, not all of them ended up like Maddie Earp,
Live that. Right.
by suicide and because they had addictions and things like that. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of interesting characters out there. So I imagine that some of the spirits or things that you run across have got to be so interesting. And let me ask you, because I have to ask you, because out there, have you run across any non human entities?
Not at all.
Never,
Nothing. Okay.
never,
And what I mean by that
nothing.
is
No,
that
everybody's been.
I've had, I've heard stories of people running across things that were unexplainable as far as, uh, you know, experiences that they knew that this was not like a human spirit. And by this, I don't mean even demonic, just either a nature spirit, something that it was like way out there that was part of the nature of the landscape out there.
I don't think we've
No, we haven't run
had
into
any.
anything like that. I know, a lot of Native American lore is, like the skinwalkers
Mm-hmm.
and, shapeshifters and such like that. We haven't run into anything like that.
And I'll tell you something right now. I think a lot of it has to do with your own self-being and your own intentions.
Okay.
Spirits can see your energy a
Sure.
mile coming.
Of
So,
course.
I mean, that's not to say that innocent people don't see, scary things,
Sure.
but you have to self-reflect and look at what your own, are you going through anything difficult? Is there anything that could be, you see what I'm saying?
Sure. Yes.
I
And
want
I've
to say
heard of that.
creating it, but bringing it to you. Okay.
Yes. Like a tracks
We have,
like kind of thing.
we go out. Exactly.
And have you guys done any investigations into any of the mining towns? Because I know sometimes that some of these places they had pretty horrific accidents as far as the, mining operations. Have you guys done any investigations into locations like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, a lot of the places that we have in Book One are mining towns.
Oh,
In
really?
fact, one of the chapters in Book One is an actual mine. We went into a mine from back in the 1880s. We actually went down into it,
Wow.
and you know, we're, yeah, we were told to leave,
Get out.
to get out.
But it wasn't a bad get out. It
Yeah,
wasn't
but it wasn't a bad get out. It was a get out because the mine wasn't safe, kind of a thing. So yeah, we go
Oh,
to a lot of mining camps and run into accident victims, that have accidents to mine and such like that. We've talked to women, spirits of women that lost their husbands in the mines.
sure.
It's an extremely interesting uh, place to go when you go to a mining town because the the diversity of people and spirits that you find in a mining town is just really, really vast.
Because let me tell you something. I'm not claustrophobic, but then I think of doing that as far as your job, your work that you would have to face every day. And you look at, especially at some of the mines, the way they were in those years where it was like really small and dank and I don't know how they did that. God,
Oh, and it was hard work. Oh my goodness.
if you
That
would
was
see these
it was
shafts
really
that all
hard.
they would have is some pieces of lumber and that was it to hold them open. Oh man, I don't. That's
Yeah, and they had to do it all by candlelight. We had
yeah.
flashlights, but they did by candlelight. So my hats off to them. They were definitely a much tougher breed of people than we are today, for sure.
Yes. And I guess that's another thing that that people don't realize that back then you had to do what you needed to do to survive. And
Oh
if this
yeah.
was
I
the
mean,
only place that was had a job, there you go. You had to
you you could recreate yourself over and over, just to get work. So,
yes, and that and I hate to say it also, especially if they were like it was like already an established mine, they kind of like were kind of like they didn't care too much about their workers. It was like, oh, that one died, get another one, because I guess there was always going to be people there that wanted a job. So it was like,
Yeah.
this is what it is. And I know I mean, you could, I mean, there were so many things that could happen to you. Not only, you hear of all these explosions or, the mines collapse, but from what I understand, there was also a lot of accidents having to do with those, with either the equipment that was being used to mine, like those buckets or those carts that they would use. Like if you weren't aware what was going on around you, you could really get
Oh
hurt with
yeah.
one of those things too. And I imagine, yeah, that was a very and like you pointed out, you said you communicated also with women that and that's another thing that people don't realize, that back then a woman, and when I say a woman or family, let's say a woman with children, you were totally dependent on your husband to put food on the table.
Hmm.
His job meant everybody. So hear what happens when from one day to the next your husband, your the one that makes it possible for everybody to keep a roof over their head and food on the table, dies. Back then they didn't have, none of the. I mean, that was another thing. It was like, okay, now what do I do with my kids and myself? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big learning curve, when we did a lot of these towns. So, we learned a lot. I think we learned more from them than they did from us.
Oh
So,
yeah. I mean, and there were several instances where we would go out to hopefully speak to specific people, or we knew there was some history, so we wanted to go this direction.
Right.
And but when we got there, a spirit would come along and say, "Hey, come over here," and we were redirected and talked to somebody totally different that we didn't even know
Really.
was out there. Yeah, it's been really enlightening, to say the least.
Let me ask you, do you think, knowing what you know, that a lot of times Hollywood has romanticized the Old West a little bit too much, as in, yeah, there was opportunity, but at the same
Yes.
time, a lot of danger?
oh yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the more we do what we do around here, um, honestly, I think Hollywood has it completely backwards. I don't think, if the story about the gunfight at the OK Corral with, Wyatt Earp and his brothers going up against the Cowboys.
Right.
Um, you know, we've gone out to the ranch that the Cowboys lived at, and they were so welcoming and so caring and spoke to us so well. And talking to them about what happened back then, and this is over many many visits, of course, but I think Hollywood has it completely wrong. I mean, back then the lawmen kind of walked a very thin line between law and
Outlaw.
outlaw.
Yeah.
It was kind of whatever made them the money. And that's certainly the way it was, here. The Clantons and McLowrys, the ones that were involved in the gunfight at the OK Corral, the more we got to know them, the more we sympathized with them, more so than we did, the Earps and Doc Holliday.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of a neat dynamic when you start talking to both parties, and you kind of see, what the dynamic was back then, completely different than what Hollywood says.
Yeah, totally murder, but that's a whole different story.
Well, no, and I find that a lot of times the current historical story has sometimes very little truth, or they omit certain things.
Yeah,
Because, like you said, the
Oh yeah.
storyline was, okay, we're going to use the cowboy, the Wyatt Earp character, um, to, hey, it'll make great movies. and
Yeah,
right.
romance.
and let's face it, I mean, from what I understand, Wyatt Earp, before he died, he was already in Hollywood, and he was being used as a almost like as a reference point for what was going on, because people have romanticized his life and what all his exploits had been. So in those early movies, they were coming to him from Hollywood, and of course, he's not going to make himself look bad. And then there you go, and it takes off,
Right.
and then
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
his version becomes the truth. Yeah.
Exactly.
And who's to
which
say?
may not be exactly the truth.
Oh no, no, and you're absolutely right. From what I understand, in some of these towns, if they were really, really out of control, and they really needed a sheriff, they kind of said, we need to get, like you said, somebody that's almost not an outlaw, but somebody that knows how to handle outlaws, or as in rowdy guys, that have too
Right.
much to drink. Like, in other words, you couldn't afford to get a mild-mannered sheriff to handle the town, because he would get either walked over or killed. So
Right,
Right.
right.
sometimes those really tough guys you wanted to be your sheriff, if you looked too hard in their past, sometimes they had done things which were questionable. Uh, as far
Oh,
as
Absolutely, but they had to be respected by the outlaws or they
oh
wouldn't make it.
yeah,
So,
yes, yes,
yeah.
and people don't realize that, especially because everybody sees these. When you look at the westerns, that you've got like the town where you've got the hardware store and all those places where the regular citizens live, and then sometimes on the little bit of the outskirts, they would have where they had all the brothels and the saloons and things like that, depending on where it was. And this wasn't like a couple of guys that were, all in all, just the majority of men, and everybody that was things that were going on. Everybody was either drunk, um,
Yeah.
fighting, things like that, and you needed a really strong personality to go in there and, like you said, and get respected. And if not, I'm going to arrest you and put you in jail. And
Yeah.
that that to me, I like I said, I find that fascinating in the sense of, you look at that, and there was so much opportunity for the right person, but then at the same time, and I'm going to give you an example. I don't know if you're familiar, and I know that it's Hollywood Lies, but you know that series that they had on Deadwood, which kind of like looked at when
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
when
yeah.
they did the thing, and it was like, you had some people that went in there were real smart, and they would set up hotels and become merchants to sell stuff to the miners, for example, or what people need just to live out there. So I could see one part of it is you had great opportunity and chance to make money, but the flip side of it is you could just very easily end up on the wrong side of an argument, and unfortunately, they settled arguments out there with a gun. It was like, what?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was more
yeah.
more common than
Absolutely.
people thought. More
Oh
common.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what we're trying to get, through with the book a little bit. What we're really hoping people do after they read our book is say, "Wow, that was completely different than what I thought it might be."
Yes.
Or, they're bringing, some history in that, I never really thought of. We're trying to get people thinking by telling them the truth as told to us by the spirits who lived during that time.
Isn't that
And it's a
interesting?
lot of times it's a completely different, perspective.
I think that is such a great point. I mean, as far as the approach of the book, because again, let's face it, a good majority of people, if they read the history book more than everybody goes by movies or programs, and they kind of believe that this is the truth, and many
Oh,
times
yeah.
Oh
it's
yeah,
not even remotely related to the truth. Like, you just, what was
that's
that
for sure.
thing that you were talking about? What happened at the OK Corral? That these poor cowboys
Right,
are always made to look as they had it coming,
Right.
and
right.
Right.
the Earps and
And
Doc
that's
Holliday
the
just gave them what they,
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the truth of it is, in if the Earps would have taken another 5 minutes to get to the OK Corral, the Cowboys would have already left. They were already getting their horses and they were ready to leave town. They weren't staying there like it shows in the movie, hoping to
right.
come up against the Earps. The Earps just went down there and, lack of a better
Looking for a
term,
fight.
ambushed them. So had the Earps been 5 minutes later, that probably gunfight would have never happened. They would have taken off out of town and it wouldn't have been.
Let me ask you something. Was the reason why, is it accurate? You always see that the Earps and Doc Holliday end up going into that confrontation because just bad blood and what had happened to one of the brothers. Is that accurate, or why is it that they ended up wanting to go and basically shoot it out with these guys and killing a, I want to say what, almost,
Well,
did they kill all of them, or just, or maybe a couple lived? I'm not sure about that.
yeah, they killed three of them. They killed Tom and Frank McLaury, and they killed Billy Clanton.
Okay.
None of the Earps or Holiday, of course, were killed. To answer your question, the main reason comes down to a power struggle. The
Okay.
Earps wanted control of the town, and the Clantons and McLaurys already had control of the town before the Earps came in. So
Okay.
it was a power struggle between the two factions. And to give you an idea, I mean, Tombstone at the time was, it had probably about 15,000 people in it,
That
permanently.
that's a lot.
And yeah, it is. And when the three people who died at the gunfight, supposedly the bad guys, when they were walked down to the graveyard, it was the biggest funeral procession that Tombstone had ever seen
To this
Wow.
day.
to this day.
It's the
Really?
biggest.
So you don't do that. Yeah, so you don't do that to people you don't like.
Absolutely
They
not.
were very
So
well liked by the
yeah,
townspeople,
they
by
were very
everybody
well
around.
liked. So it was kind of a bad situation for the Earps. That was kind of the beginning of the end, really, for the Earps.
Right, because I was gonna say after that they all disperse and go their own ways to do their own thing. Um,
Right. Well, right.
and it
They
makes
weren't very well
sense.
liked in Tombstone, the Earth.
Right, which begs the
So,
question, okay, if you just supposedly wiped out these bullies, as they're portrayed, you would think this town would be eternally grateful and you want to stay there because everybody thinks you're wonderful guys. But the fact that everybody went off and did their
Right.
own thing, yeah, that speaks volumes right there about is like, we're not wanted here anymore. We got to get out of here.
yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know, considering that they had all been together, they all went off in separate directions and did their own thing as far as
Yeah.
whether it was, I think one of them was also became a lawman, and I mean they all did, you know, uh, they made their way into different types of, and I believe Wyatt Earp, he kept on with he was running some casinos and he had a couple of mines out in I want to say in by San Diego and also in the Yukon. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had not thought of it that way. I had not thought of it that way. And let me ask you,
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
after they left Tombstone and he went on his vendetta ride, he killed Stillwell in Tucson. Him and Doc Holliday did. So they were actually wanted by the U.S. Marshals for murder. So they couldn't come back to Arizona. They had to leave.
Oh, well, yeah, that'll put it, that will, that'll put just some, yeah, ants in your pants and make you
Yep.
want to leave town. Yeah, like I need to get out of this territory. And let me ask you, what happened? Because 15,000 people in a town is a lot of people for those times. What happened at Tombstone that the population, what happened?
Well, what happened was that the mines, all the silver mines around Tombstone,
Hmm.
most of them flooded
In
in
1887.
about 1887. There was a big
Oh,
earthquake here, and most of the mines flooded, so they couldn't be worked anymore. So no mines, no money.
oh,
So people kind of took off and went their own separate ways.
yes.
And But this place almost became a ghost town with nobody.
Mm-hmm.
But it has always had people here, and thankfully for I guess Wyatt Earp's lies about
Yeah, in a way, it kind of
the
served its
gunfight at
purpose
the
in a
OK
way.
Corral. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
it kept the town alive, and it's still going today with probably about 1,500 people in it now.
Okay, but yeah, I could see where if the backbone was the mining industry and that I didn't know that thing about the flooding. Yeah, that will do it. Yeah,
Yeah,
everything
there
is
was a
built around that industry. And then when
there it
people,
was there was a I think it was 7.2 earthquake in northern Mexico in 1887. So it affected a lot of southern Arizona.
I did
So
not know that. I
kind of
did not
destroyed
know
a lot,
that.
destroyed some towns and flooded the mines.
God, I did not know that. That is so interesting because you always think of, some of these towns you think, well, why, what happened to them? Why did they, and some of them never are that big to begin with, but 15,000 is a lot. That's a lot of people. But then again, if that one source dries up, that's it. Everybody goes on and looks for greener pastures as far as opportunities are concerned. To
Yeah,
Yes.
that's correct.
And let me ask you, Haggy, if you guys ever communicated with any, I don't want to say famous, but any known character, as whether it's a lawman, a gunfighter, anybody that you've run across that you were surprised that you
Oh
actually,
yeah,
like who?
yeah. Well, well, one of them was Mr. Clanton. He was the father of the people that were killed at the OK
Really?
Corral. He was, yeah, he was kind of a notable character himself. We have some just amazing EVPs when we went out those couple times from Mr. Clanton. We can tell it's him because it's an older gentleman with kind of a southern accent that comes through
Uh-huh.
on the EVP, so we know it's him. We've talked to John Ringo,
Yeah.
out at his gravesite. Yeah, we've talked to him. He's one of my favorite, outlaws. So we go out there as much as we can, and we talk to him. And see, his death has always been ruled a suicide, but he told us it was murder. So Rhonda and I actually have put together a packet because I'm former law enforcement. So
Okay.
we went through and we interviewed the people who own the ranch where he's buried, that
Okay.
their family owned the ranch back then. So they got the stories from great grandpa
Yeah.
basically,
Firsthand,
firsthand,
it's always been murder to those people.
right. So we
There
talked to
you
John
go.
Ringo, and he told us who killed him. So we have a pack together with forensics and everything else that we have currently going to the Cochise County medical examiner to try to reopen the case and put it at least as undetermined and not suicide. We're trying to clear John Ringo's name.
And what was it? Supposedly, how did he kill himself? He what, shot himself? Or what did he, how did he kill?
Yeah, he's
Yeah. Ultimately suicide.
yeah, suicide. He
Suicide
supposedly
by
shot
shooting.
himself in the head.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
And he's
Which,
saying somebody
if you
murdered him.
read the oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he was found in the crook of a tree, um, and he had a bullet hole in his head that came out kind of the top of his head, but he still had his hat on and there was no blood inside the hat, and his gun belt was put on him upside down and backwards.
So
So
Yeah.
that was he could have done. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies there. I
Yeah.
did, a forensic thing. I could tell where the bullet probably came from, and it matched up perfectly. So yeah,
it's very plausible.
it's very plausible.
And why did they want to murder him? Do you know? I mean, was
Uh,
it, and the reason why I'm
Could have
asking is
been
that usually when there's bad blood between people or guys or whatever, one of two
it could have
things.
been, over
I'm sorry,
right,
go
it
ahead,
could
go
have
ahead.
been over a card. It could have been over a card game, but the guy that he said that killed him also worked for Wyatt Earp. Okay,
Oh,
it's part in the Oriental. So he kind of was playing both sides and probably was a hired hitman.
wow. Okay. And I was, the reason why I was asking is I'm thinking to myself, okay, usually what, God, that's pretty obvious that his hat was put on after the fact and that thing with a gun belt, that's like, okay, here's all these very evident clues. This is not a suicide. I'm thinking to myself, why would they overlook this? One of two things. Somebody there was, I hate to say it, whoever was looking, because they would send this, I imagine, to the inquest, like, the coroner and stuff, and they determine,
Right.
like you said, is it a suicide? Is it a murder? Whatever. Somebody must have had some pull there to get it to be.
well, yeah. Well, what happened was, Ringo was found dead in the tree the next morning by the people who, was at the ranch. So they called Tombstone, or sent a letter to Tombstone, what have you, to have medical examiner come out.
Okay.
So, it takes almost a day to get out there. It's the
Okay.
middle, it's the beginning of July, middle of July when he was killed. So it's hot. So
Yeah.
the body already started kind of decomposing a little bit.
Ah, okay,
They did
okay.
back the wagon all the way back to Tombstone for a day. So they literally looked at it and said, okay, finally John Ringo's dead, because he was, considered a bad guy, one of the, cowboy outlaws.
Yeah.
So they were like, well, good riddance to bad rubbish. So they literally dug a hole, about 10 feet from him, pulled his body into it, buried him, done. That was the extent of it.
They didn't even bother to bury him in consecrated ground like in a cemetery?
No,
They made that a cemetery.
they just
Yeah.
yeah, they just dug a hole and put him in, and that was it. So he's buried about 10 feet from where he died.
God, that you know what? That speaks volumes right there, what you said about what the people there considered it. Because back then, people cared about who was, buried in the cemetery, and sometimes people went to extraordinary lengths to
Yep.
even bring a body back to make sure that it got buried, like in the cemetery, in a family plot, or in consecrated ground.
Oh yeah.
But the fact that they just, like, yeah, right over there, yeah, dig a hole over there, that speaks volumes right there about maybe why they didn't really push hard on suicide. Yep, sound right to you? Yep, okay, suicide it is.
Right,
Too bad.
right, and see, and that makes for a very, very upset John Ringo
Oh
in the
yeah.
afterlife because now people are talking to him, thinking that he committed suicide, calling him a coward and all
Yes.
this other stuff, and
Yes.
he was when we first started talking to him, he was not a happy spirit to talk to because you know, he was just basically very upset. So it took several trips of us going out there to talk to him and, find out the real story. And now when we go out there, he's really, almost welcoming to us.
I can imagine. And how did they find out? Did they ever, where he was buried, did they ever put some type of marker out there for him? Or, because I know sometimes when time passes by, people forget, like, yeah, that guy, they buried him out there. Or did somebody keep tabs on where they had buried him?
Well, they did. The ranch owner did put a marker. He put a
Okay.
stone that he carved John Ringo in the date.
Okay.
And then later, about maybe, I think it was about 15, 20 years ago, the Arizona Historical Commission put a good sized stone monument right there.
Okay.
And so now it's part of the Arizona Historical Commission.
Okay.
So it's actually considered an actual grave, so people can go out there and actually visit it if they want to.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. He was luck, but you know what? That's like you pointed out. If you've got a spirit of somebody that was murdered, but then they rule him a suicide, which I know in some maybe for him personally, I would never have done that. I'm not a coward. I would have, yeah. That's like, yeah, I could see where that could bind him. And let me ask you, he hasn't crossed over. Has he ever told you? Is he doing? Is he staying here willingly, or is he one of these that hasn't crossed over because he's just not sure what's waiting for him on the other side?
Oh no, we've talked to him about that, and where he was killed, it's a absolutely beautiful area in the
Mm-hmm.
Chiricahua Mountains. And he just really loves it there. He used to stop there all the time between Tombstone and a place called Galeyville,
Okay.
which was kind of like a cowboy town. He used to stop there all the time and talk to all the ranchers. Loved him.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
they would cook dinner
they
for
would cook
him, and
dinner for him and take care of his horses, and he just really enjoyed it there, and that's why he's there now
Okay.
because he just really he's enjoyed the area, and I can see why. It's beautiful there.
Right. So he's there because he wants to be there. That's understandable. That's understandable.
Right.
Let me ask you one of my because have did you run across, I mean, I know like all these, frontiers town and everything. Did you run across any locations or any entities that were Native American as far as what was going on there?
oh yeah, one of our favorite places is a Council Rocks in the
Okay.
Dragoon Mountains, and a lot of Apache warriors up there, Chief Cochise. So that chapter will be in book two.
Okay.
But there's not a lot of places in Arizona that don't have some type of Native American history.
Right,
But
right.
we've also talked to Geronimo.
You have.
Have we talked to anything else notable?
Not
Wow.
notable.
But we've talked to a lot of Native American people. So,
Okay.
and they're
And the reason why I
uh,
ask is that, I mean, human beings are human beings, but Native American beliefs in the spirit world are different from, let's say, Christians, which is what, was out there. There's two different
they
types of
are.
belief systems as to what happens when you die. Um, you know, some I know I'm not going to say I don't know specifically what the beliefs for the Apaches were, but some Native Americans they did ancestor worship in the sense, and then others were like once you were dead, you never spoke of the dead, you never said their name. It was like because they were afraid of having that person, even if it was a family member, come back and haunt them. So that's why I know that their belief system, depending on the tribe, of course, is different. Um, and but and I know that there's some places that you could say, okay, there's a residual type of haunting because maybe something went on there on that land for maybe thousands of years or hundreds of years, and when people are there, they'll pick up on things. And then there's the actual, haunting of an intelligent haunting, and that's why I was wondering if you had run across any that were Native American. And then I'm thinking to myself because as far as regular settlements, you knew, okay, either there's a town there or there was a town there or there's a ghost town and this is a place to start looking. But where the Native Americans lived, I imagine in some cases there's no sign to indicate there was once a village here or anything like
No,
that.
That's true.
I mean,
So,
there is, and I mean, we have there's Native American history all over Arizona. But I mean, we just recently learned for book two that there's a Presidio not too far from our house, actually. It's a Spanish Presidio
okay.
built by New Spain, but they sent orders from the King of Spain through
Hmm.
Mexico up here in 1776.
Okay.
And it existed for about 5 years. Um, so it was a fairly large presidio, large, structure with officers and um, regular enlisted and their families. But
Hmm.
they were attacked constantly by the Apache. Constantly. I mean, the Apache killed hundreds of these Spanish. And to
Right.
finally, they just abandoned the Presidio. But what we have found doing research for our book is that they are now working together on the other side, both
Really?
Spanish and Native. Yes.
That's so interesting, God. Yeah, all of a sudden you real
So enemies in life. Yes.
I think that's fascinating because it's almost like when you're under the side, you realize, man, that was stupid of us. We were killing ourselves over, like you get over that. So that
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Not it's not always like enemies in life and enemies in the afterlife. No, in the afterlife, you
Right.
realize that the differences were only superficial in a way, and that's
Correct.
I
They
like
had
that
very
story.
similar values. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like and like everything else, if you know, if you were a soldier, you were told what to do. If you were an Apache and you belonged to that tribe, you
You were
know,
told what to do.
you were told what to
Yeah.
do. You better, everybody fell in step, even if inside their head they were thinking, God, what am I doing? I don't. But yeah, it's a fascinating period of time, and God, your book sounds so super interesting. But anyway, Rhonda, Dwight, I want to thank you so, so much for spending this time with me and talking about your experiences and, you know, And I'm now when let me ask you something. When you're saying you are working on another book that's going to be out after this one that's just releasing now?
That's correct.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we are.
And do you know what you're going to be bringing that out this year at all, or you don't know yet when you're going to be issuing that, releasing that?
Yeah, we're not sure yet.
Okay.
Like I say, our first book's just set to release,
Right.
next week. So whenever, that one kind of runs its course, our
Mm-hmm.
publisher, will probably take this one and, then we'll be able to announce a release date on the second one.
Okay. I imagine there's a lot of stories out there. There's a lot. There's a lot of. There's a like I said out there, like in all things, of course. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of unexpected emotions, and I imagine that you guys must run across. And when those spirits decide that they want to communicate with you and tell you their story, what an earful you guys must hear. It's like what? And this,
That's for sure.
soap operas don't have anything on
That
this
is
because, and that's the thing. Sometimes people think of sometimes as the good old days, and it's like, man, humans have been humans, and even back then, things that people got up to, and
oh yeah.
it's incredible. And um, some of the secrets they kept, also incredible. So
Yep.
again, guys, thank you so very much. You guys have been wonderful, and I want to wish you the best of
Thank you.
luck with this book, and I look forward to
Thank you so
number two.
much.
Yep.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you. Take
much.
care. Bye bye.
You too. Have a good night.
Bye bye.
God, see what they were saying about um, this thing with the what do you call it? The real story on history. I love that. I think that is fascinating, and I think what they were describing of what happened. Let's say with that story about the OK Corral, which I mean, there's been so many movies made about it, and most recently the Tombstone and Wyatt Earp. They both those movies came out like pretty much very close together, and you know what? I think because let's face it, everybody gets celebrity driven, and you watch TV, and people don't realize that a lot of these versions that they put out there of these stories, even though they might say based on or inspired by true events, sometimes loosely based is being kind. Sometimes they have little or no truth, or they kind of take the truth and they massage it and go, ah, okay. Why? Because, hey, every story's got to have a hero, every story's got to have its villains. And what they were talking about was Wyatt Earp. And this is the thing. To me personally, I like stories where everybody's not so one dimensional. And yes, you are going to have certain people that are pure evil and they're just bad all the way through from beginning to end. But the majority of folks, yes, some are worse than others, but we're a mix. We have our good things, we have our bad things, we have bad tendencies or thoughts that we fight against and we prevail, and then there's other people that give it to it too much. But anyway, when you hear this story, what they were talking about, the OK Corral, was that, Wyatt Earp and the Earp brothers, which are always looked at as gunmen, and et cetera, they were maybe not as much good guys as you think. They were battling for control of a town, control of uh, maybe the gambling interest, because, as I said before, Wyatt Earp, he went on, he took up with Josie, which is the one that you see in all the movies, which, from what I've done on my research, she was at one point, she worked as a prostitute. I know they portray her as being an actress. That's not she. It seems that she ran away from home when she was very young, maybe foolishly, and she ended up working in a brothel. And the truth of what I found is for a lot of these girls that fell into this for one way or another, uh, basically their story became known if they crossed paths with a man that for some reason was famous. Okay, in this case it was Wyatt Earp. And of course, Wyatt Earp him and Josie, that's true. They did spend the rest of their lives married together. As a matter of fact, she outlived him by 15 years. And he went on and he moved on to San Diego when San Diego was up and booming. And he ran some casinos. He owned some mines. Then there, took a little bit of a slump and he went on to the Yukon. Same thing. Uh, I'll give him that. That man was an entrepreneur, and what people don't realize was that Josie, his wife, had a really bad gambling habit, really bad gambling habit, and that she would gamble and gamble and gamble, and then he would have to go behind her, not behind her back, but basically pay off her debts. And as a matter of fact, like I said, she outlived him by 15 years, and she passed away. She lived in California. She was basically penniless, and it was some of his friends that he had met, because remember, he died into the 20s, so he kind of like overlapped a little bit with the early cowboy westerns where they were coming to him, and of course he had a colorful life, you cannot deny that. And and he gave him, of course, his version of his life. I would too. But anyway, they were the ones that footed the bill for her to be buried, because she just did not know how to keep a hold of her money. And you know, and again, it's interesting as the way history is written is not exactly the truth. It's not like now that we've got phones and cameras and everybody can document what really happened. Um, and just for example, that story about the Earps, that of course they're always known for the showdown at the OK Corral, and that's true. The guy led a very colorful life. His brothers then went on their way and did their own thing. But you know what? People don't realize, prior to him taking up with Josie, he had not one but two wives, both who were had worked in a brothel. Okay, and Maddie was number two, the one that Rhonda talked about. That she had an addiction problem. She ended up committing suicide, and she's buried in a little town in Arizona, because what happened with good old nice guy Wyatt was he dumped her. He dumped her and he took off with Josie and lived the rest of his life, and they got married and blah 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 blah, and the rest is history. And back then, a lot of people, in some instances, they'll say they were never married, but you have to understand, back then, common law marriages were common, and sometimes they weren't common law, but the paperwork is gone. It's not like today where you have vital statistics, and they have triplicates of everything that happens: births, deaths, marriages, and and yeah, there was a lot of people that made their lives out in this frontiers town, basically going from boom town to boom town, or whether it was mining or something's going on there. In the case of where you had cattle, being shipped out, they towns sprung around where these railroad depots would come in to unload, upload cattle and take them back to the east, because before they would have to drive them, which is where you get the Chisholm Trail. You had a lot of towns that went up around those things. And despite the romanticism that Hollywood gives them, these were very, very hard, difficult times. Uh, and what he described about is the miners. People, if you were a man and you had a family and you died from one day, you went into a mine, an explosion occurred, and you were dead, guess what? If you had a family that depended on you, that's it. They didn't have. And you had a woman maybe with children. What was she going to do? Believe it or not, some of these ladies ended up in brothels because they had no choice. Sometimes they would even what they were making, they would feed their kids and even their own parents, when because they had no choice. What else were you going to do? And maybe you didn't have any place to move back east to. This was it. And your husband just got killed. There was no type of government assistance as far as, oh man, we're going to give you money. That was it. You're too bad. Sorry. Well, maybe the mining company, and that's it. And sometimes if it was bad enough, there was not even a funeral per se, because Your husband is buried under 3 tons of rock. Okay. So, yeah, these were rough and tumble times. A lot of opportunity, but a lot. Unless you had a lot of money or you were very lucky, as in some of these guys that, ran across some type of, either gold or silver or, they were able to stake a claim and you, you could very easily lose your life. And the point being that that is the perfect recipe for intelligent hauntings. And I've said this before. You're going to get people that die suddenly and they make their way and they're fine. But then there's others that die unexpectedly. And I'll give you an example. You got a miner, dies suddenly. He's left behind a wife and children. He knows, maybe in those few seconds that when he knows he's going to die, if he, whatever, milliseconds, that his wife and his children depend on him to live. If you don't think that that worry about what is going to happen to my family could bind a soul, yes, it can. Okay, and sometimes if they get stuck in that cycle of what happened to them, or why did this happen, or it could be anything, they kind of get like on a hamster wheel of questions and worries and what happened, and they like Rhonda said, they don't recognize the passage of time. Uh, like I said, a lot of things along those lines. Or what he said, that they've come across spirits of wives, of the wives, the women that were left behind to, from one day to the next, figure out how they are going to live, how they're going to protect their children. You know, really, really interesting. I personally, like I said, I love research, and one of the reasons I love research, and it sounds like this is what they're doing with their book, is that they're finding out what's the real story, the true story. Plus, they've got this great source. They've got the entities that are there telling them, and like I said, you've got all these characters that are well recognized, like the Earps and all of these, but you've got a cast of characters out there that went out there, lived, died under whatever circumstances. Their names are unknown to history. No, these were like regular people. But let's face it, this was their story. And when they find somebody that they can communicate, like Dwight and like Rhonda, and this is like maybe the first time that they're able to say, my name is so and so, and I came from out east, and maybe I was in the Civil War, but I was just a soldier, and then I came out here, and I brought my wife and my kids, and I was working in the mines, and we were doing okay, but then one day there was a big explosion, and I was buried under all these rocks, and I wasn't able to get out, and blah 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 blah. I'm just making this as I go along, but I don't think it's that far-fetched either. This is the first time they have for somebody, and nobody knows who this guy was. He's not notorious or infamous or famous or nothing like that, but their stories are just as riveting. And in some cases, they give you an accurate uh, interpretation of what really happened at that point in time. But anyway, guys, I hope you like the show. Please subscribe to the channel so you can get notified. If you're listening to me on podcast, same thing. You can either get a link to the video on YouTube. I'm also on Steemit, or on the different podcast platforms, whether it's Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spreaker, SoundCloud. Just go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You find links there, either directly to those sites, or you can download the MP3 file for the podcast version, or you can, I also have the link right there to the YouTube show, which I have a lot of fantastic guests coming on. Catch me live stream on Facebook and on Twitter. My true believers, do not forget about me. I've gotten some really interesting stories. Go to the Submit Your Story tab on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I want to hear your stories. Like I said, you want to send it to me, you want to email it to me, you want to contact me, and I can just do this. I'm considering at some point in time even putting in a phone line so I can talk to you guys directly, because I know some people are a little bit shy and they're not into writing, especially if it's kind of a long story. So I've got that in the works. Uh, like I said, also you can find me on Steemit. I'm going off to other platforms just so that you guys find me. You guys find me. Again, like I said, I've got a lot of fantastic shows. I've got a lot of requests to do storytelling. I've gotten a lot of like, oh, about some of these places. We would like to hear some of these stories about the ghosts or the haunted houses or the haunted hill or the, you know, so I might do a few shows around some of the haunted stories, some known and some not well known about certain locations, because a lot of people like to hear those. So again, guys, thank you so very much for coming in, listening, watching, whatever the case might be. And again, guys, I think you are all wonderful. And please, you will find a link to Rhonda and Dwight's website down below in the credits. Don't forget to check out their website and their brand new book. Take care.